of you have actually heard of just the third metric? So we can, okay, great. But some of you have not. And so part of the third metric is moving just beyond money and power. So I thought, Arianna, could you talk to us a little bit about what does it mean, what does success look like when you start to think about the third metric and what it means?
Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be here and delighted to have this conversation with you, Bonita. I loved our last panel and what you said that I'm going to query you on about sacred spaces. So the third metric is an idea that occurred to me after I collapsed from exhaustion, burnout, and sleep deprivation, which is how I start the book. And as I came to, that was 7 years ago, in a pool of blood, having broken my cheekbone and got 4 stitches on top of my right eye, I started asking a lot of these questions that we often stop asking when we leave college, like what is a good life, what is success? And while by conventional definitions of success are successful, by any sane definition of success, if you come to in a pool of blood and nobody has shot you, you're not successful. So that's when I started thinking, our society defines success in terms of these 2 metrics of money and power. You know, we give them different names, but that's what it comes down to. And I came to the conclusion that life is really not complete without the third metric. It's really like the third leg of the stool. The first 2 metrics are the 2 legs, and you basically try to sit on a stool and you at some point fall off because it's not sustainable. The third metric consists of these 4 pillars, and each of the pillars is a section in the book. Well-being, which starts with sleep, because I love the fact that Googlers are all about data and evidence, right? That's why I have in the book 55 pages of scientific endnotes, because all the things about sleep, meditation, renewal pauses are not kind of new agey, flaky, California stuff. You know, they're actually scientifically based performance enhancement tools. And for all the skeptics in the room, look at the scientific data. All major universities now, for example, have a sleep division as part of their medicine school. In fact, I became such a sleep evangelist that Harvard asked me to join the board of their School of Medicine sleep division. That gives you an idea of how much I talk about it. In fact, I gave a commencement at Smith, and I told the women graduates to sleep their way to the top. And I was a late convert because I came to this realization having collapsed after I used to get 4 to 5 hours. And then I read the scientific data and realized that if I got 7 to 8 hours, I would actually be more productive, more creative, less reactive, and happier. So it became a priority. And just very quickly, the second pillar is wisdom, and we can talk more about that. But everybody here wants to be creative, and every creative person will tell you that creativity is not the product of clearing our email box or being always on. It's often the product of these eureka moments which come when we create some space in our lives in which to hear the whisperings, as Steve Jobs called it, and basically connect with some deeper wisdom and deeper insights. The third part of the third metric is wonder, you know, being connected with the wonder, the mystery of life, often just the ordinary beauty of life. We spend so much time multitasking. I mean, you walk down the streets of New York, and hardly anybody is just walking. People are either walking and being on the phone, walking and texting. And also, if they're walking and texting, the assumption seems to be that if you're not texting while walking, it means you're not as busy and not as important, so you better get out of the way. And I remember when I stopped doing that 7 years ago, I started noticing things that I had completely ignored, like this beautiful building by my apartment. And I remember I told a friend, this is so beautiful, look at the ornamentation at the top. When did it go up? And she said, 1890. So what else are we missing? And the final pillar is giving. That giving is really part of a completely fulfilled life, and it starts with small acts of connecting with people that otherwise we might take for granted in our daily lives.
So one of the things in the book you talk about, this is not something that it's not a simple thing. It's, to actually thrive. You have to know what you're doing. You have to think about it and be more conscious. And I think for the women, and there's even a question here, but we've all been told now with this worldwide conversation on leaning in. How do we go about leaning in, and then also this notion of having a life where you can thrive, and just invoke this third metric? How would you address the women in terms of those two aspects?
Well, first of all, I think these two are completely compatible, which is why Sheryl Sandberg did a big endorsement of the book and actually did the first conversation. I've had a series of conversations with women like you, which has been really great. And Sheryl Sandberg did the first one when the book came out at the end of March in San Francisco at the Symphony Hall. And the reason for that is to make it clear that thriving and taking care of the third metric in our lives doesn't mean that we don't have big dreams or accomplish big things. It just means recognizing that we are going to lean in more effectively if we learn to lean back. Recharge ourselves and lean in. It's like a dance. And anybody here is a cat? If you look at cats, you know what they do? They if they're going to jump, they lean back before they jump. In French, for those who speak French, there is a term called reculer pour mieux sauter, which literally means lean back in order to jump higher. And it's really what modern science has demonstrated, which is the need for recovery time, the need for renewal. And really, ahead of women and business people, athletes have incorporated these practices. I was in Los Angeles and I met with Kobe Bryant a couple of weeks ago, and he was telling me how he has a nap, sometimes a 90-minute nap, he says, before he gets out to play. And that clears his mind, de-stresses him, and allows him to be fully present. Now, when he said Phil Jackson, their coach, started having them meditate and do Tai Chi and have naps, they all kind of looked at them aghast. But he was like this amazing coach, so they all did it. And then they began to see the impact it had on them. So that's really why there's absolutely no contradiction between the two. If we just lean in without leaning back and recharging, that's when we fall over. And you see so many women, not just my own experience, look at what happened to Hillary Clinton. She literally collapsed, again, from exhaustion and burnout. And hers was more serious, ended up with a clot in the brain. And you look around and you see men having heart attacks in their 50s, high blood pressure, diabetes, pulmonary embolisms. All these are stress-related diseases. And 3/4 of our healthcare costs now are because of stress-related chronic preventable diseases. So basically, what I'm saying when it comes to women is women should not just want to be at the top of the world. They also want to change the world, because the way it's been working is not sustainable.
So it's interesting. I started tracking, just learning more about the sleep. And my husband said, I don't think you're getting enough, sleep. And I said, oh. But then you look at the data. And then the data tells you, in fact, you're not. But when you do, it just adds so much to your well-being. One of the things, Arianna, that you talked about in the book, which I think just made me smile, because I think we all can harken back to our childhood, and when we did have that sense of wonder. Can you just elaborate on wonder and how we can actually bring that back into our lives? And because I thought that was an interesting aspect of the book.
Well, thank you, because I actually love that chapter particularly because I feel that everybody here, let's just take everybody in the room, is really curious, right? You wouldn't be here if you were not. You're curious about everything, from whatever you can Google and any amount of big data to finding out about Mars or Venus. But we're not really particularly curious about our inner space, our inner space exploration of who are we, why are we here, why do we die? All these questions, I find them completely fascinating. And I have a lot of friends who find them fascinating, so we have a lot of these conversations. And if you think of it, as the Onion headline put it, death rate holds steady at 100%. So much though we want to ignore it, it's a reality. And when somebody dies who is close to us, it makes us often look at our lives and recalibrate. I was meeting with Jared Cohen upstairs before I came down, and we were talking about that, and he told me when Michael Hastings died suddenly in a car crash, and who was his age, 31 I think when he died, Jared is 32 now, he said it made him just recalibrate his own life. It made him prioritize friendships, for example, or whatever impact it has on each one of us. So I think these are conversations which make us reintegrate the sense of wonder and mystery about life. Wherever we are in the spectrum of religion and spirituality, it doesn't matter. I have friends of mine who are religious and friends of mine who are complete atheists. As Reid Hoffman calls himself a mystical atheist. He says, I'm an atheist, but I'm very aware of the mystery of life. I'm very aware that there is a lot I don't understand, and I like the exploration. So I like the exploration, and I like the conversation around it, because I feel it enriches life and opens up our perception to things that otherwise we would miss. That's why I have a section in that chapter on coincidences.
Yes.
Because a lot of people, even people who are complete atheists, who don't think there's anything to life beyond what we see and touch and feel and smell, they love coincidences, because it sort of makes us stop and feel, is there some kind of hidden purpose to what's happening in our lives? Because this coincidence is absolutely amazing. And some of them are trivial coincidences. I have some of them in the book too. And some of them are significant coincidences. But I remember I mentioned a trivial coincidence when there was somebody taking a survey at a mall and asked people to give them their numbers. And one person gave him a number that he made up, the phone number, and the surveyor said, that's not your number. And the guy said, why isn't it my number? He said, because that's my number. So it suddenly stops you. I mean, it doesn't mean anything, but it stops you, because what is the probability of this happening? So when things happen that have an incredibly astronomically high probability of them happening, it stops us and makes us just look at life and look at the possibility that maybe there is some kind of hidden purpose, and maybe even somebody with a sense of humor behind it.
So why don't we start lining up, because I know many of you have questions in the room, and I'm going to go through the Dory questions, but start thinking about your questions and line up the mics.
And while we're doing that, can I ask you a question?
Sure, of course.
Because we did an interview with you for the Huffington Post, and you had something very interesting. I don't know if everybody here knows that Bonita is a ballet dancer. And when you were in ballet practice, one day, you said normally you don't bring your smartphone in, this is your sacred time, but one day you just looked at your smartphone. And the minute you looked at your smartphone, your whole work life intruded into that sacred space. And the rest of the time you could not be as present. I think that's just a great example of why it's important for us to create those spaces where we disconnect from our technology and reconnect with ourselves or our loved ones or the present moment. And I just loved the story. If you can tell us a little more about it.
Yes, so I shared this, but I do take ballet class, and I decided, during the break, once you leave, you do the floor, and then you leave, and you take a break, and you come back, and you do the combination. And so I looked at my phone, and I had received a call, and it just changed everything about the rest of the class. I couldn't do my pirouettes. I wasn't focusing on the combination, and I just decided at that point, this is the one thing that is so important to me. This is my sacred space, and I'm not going to let technology invade my space when I'm taking ballet. So I made that as a point, and I do think that all of us have to, especially when we're 24/7 in many cases with technology, we do have to be very conscious about making sure that we do have a sacred space. So what is yours, Arianna?
So my sacred space is, first of all, at night, and this is one of the 12 steps I have in the book. I have 12 steps that I recommend for people, and I pick 12 deliberately because we are addicted to this current way of being perpetually on, and even addicted to burnout. So the first step for me is picking a time at the end of my day when I turn off all my devices and gently escort them out of my bedroom. Because if I keep my iPhone, say, charging by my bed, and I wake up in the middle of the night for whatever reason, I'm going to be tempted to look at my data. And I don't want my day life to intrude into my night life. I want to wake up fully recharged, because again, the science shows that if you look at your data in the middle of the night, it's going to take you longer to go back to sleep. And when you go back to sleep, it's not going to be as deep and recharging, because your brain has started already processing things you have to do during the day.
Great. So let's take some of the questions from the Dory. So one question we actually covered, just Cheryl's book in terms of lean in, but what kind of meditation do you practice, and do you have a specific mantra or mantras that you come back to in times of high stress? So what do you do in those high stress times?
So I now meditate every day in the morning for about 20 minutes, sometimes longer if I can. But in the book, I recommend that you start with 5 minutes, because everybody has 5 minutes. And to remember one thing, there is no wrong way to meditate, because everybody here is a perfectionist. You want to do everything right. So that's where you have to surrender. All you have to do is give yourself 5 minutes and concentrate on your breath. You don't, I have specific steps in the book, but you don't even have to worry about a mantra. You can just focus on the inhalation and exhalation. I also have an appendix with 12 meditation apps. I know it's a paradox to use technology to help us disconnect from technology, but hey, whatever it takes. So I have picked my 12 favorite meditation apps if you want to be walked through a meditation, and one of my favorites is Headspace. Is anybody here on Headspace? It's a really great app that was created by an Englishman who then became a Buddhist monk and then became a juggler. And it's really great. And now, it's been really become very popular in England. Even the Bank of England is using it, which is part of the amazing thing that has happened. In 2013, meditation became mainstream. And CEOs started coming out not as being gay, but as being meditators. Like Ray Dalio, the co-founder of one of the biggest hedge funds, Bridgewater, came out saying, I've been meditating for 35 years, and I consider it the foundation of my success. Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, Mark Bertolini, the CEO of Aetna. It was really, truly amazing. In Davos last year, there were 27 sessions with CEOs about meditation, mindfulness, etc. Just amazing shift in the zeitgeist around these issues.
Great. Michael.
Thanks, Bonita. Hi, Arianna.
Can we put the lights up a little so I can see you?
Right here.
I can see Michael, but I'd like to see everybody else.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, and thank you.
Michael, also, what would be great is if you tell us what you do, and also if you have a sacred space.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. My name is Michael Peggs. I've been at Google for 4.5 years. I work in the online partnership group. We're essentially responsible for selling AdSense, Ad Exchange, DoubleClick, a lot of sell-side products here. And I started in Mountain View and came to New York 2.5 years ago. And my sacred space, I do enjoy a drink on the weekend, so probably any bar. But honestly,
What's your sacred drink?
well, you know, I'm into my whiskeys right now. But no, my sacred space is probably either in Tompkins Square Park near where I live, or kind of Central Park with a book in my hand, just people watching. And New York is great for that.
Right.
But my question is, you know, I think a lot of us do seek the conventional types of success, and arguably they allow you space for kind of the third leg, if you will. I'm wondering, as you were building your business, looking back, could you have built it to the success it is now with 7-8 hours of sleep? I think there's this constant hustle we all feel where it's this kind of need to work harder and more often. Could you have built the Huffington Post and your empire to what it is now on 7 to 8 hours of sleep?
Well, the great question. And I would say categorically yes. In fact, most of the success of the Huffington Post has been built after my wake-up call in the last 7 years. We are 9 years old. And I can say categorically, looking back, that after all, the most important thing you can do for a business, whether it's a startup or a big business, is having clarity about your vision of where you are going. And for me, it was very clear, for example, that we needed to grow internationally and that this had to become a priority, and to do it in a way that would be fast, which meant with partners in each country. We are now in 11 countries. We're going to be launching in India and the Middle East in the fall, and we're also going to be launching in Greece, that I'm very excited about because I'm Greek, in case you hadn't noticed. This accent is for real. And I really believe that having absolute clarity about where you are going is often a function of operating from a place where you are connected to your own wisdom and a place of insight. And I really believe that about leadership too. President Clinton is quoted in my book saying, the most important mistakes I made in my life I made when I was tired. Mm-hmm. He did not specify what mistakes. But in our own ways, we can all say that. And everybody who works here, I mean, basically, you're not paid for your stamina. You are paid for your judgment. And ultimately, you are paid for your good ideas. A good idea is worth everything. And the evidence is overwhelming that you are not going to have a lot of good ideas if you are burnt out. You can still operate and process things and work through your email box, etc. But your function is going to be more transactional and less creative. So increasingly now, as we all have so many machines to do a lot of the work that human beings used to do, partly thanks to Google, we now, in fact, have an even greater opportunity to be creative, and therefore a much greater need to connect to that place in us from which we are creative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Michael.
And please write about Tompkins Park. In fact, I want to invite all of you to tell your stories of burnout, wake-up calls, sacred spaces, anything you want. We have a hashtag campaign, hashtag How I Thrive. The reason for that is that I really believe that we can get to the point where we can prevent a lot of people having their own wake-up calls. We can learn from each other's wake-up calls. Why can't you learn from mine? Or Hillary Clinton's? Why do you have to have your own? And also, we can learn from your story about the ballet, or learn from your sacred space and get ideas about what can help us thrive. And to make it super easy, I'm going to give you my email address so you can bypass the Huffington Post bureaucracy. Arianna, with 1 R and 2 N's, at huffingtonpost.com. One of the good things about founding a company is that you get the good email address.
All right.
Hi, Arianna. I'm Desmond Bunny. I manage one of the sales teams here in our New York office. I had the pleasure of seeing you speak about 2 years ago, maybe at a leadership event we did for women here at Google when you had your previous book. And I went straight from that event to one of my respites in Maui. I grew up in Hawaii and had a long time to think about the things you shared with us there and made a lot of changes ex post facto. And one of the things that I've been trying to think about is how those of us who manage teams or lead groups, can take some of the individual practices that you share and build kind of a team or a group ethos around it. I'm curious as to maybe some things you do with your teams or the people who work with you to build that into the fabric of your company, of those who report to you and things of that nature.
Great. Thank you so much for the question. Absolutely. We are definitely implementing a lot of these things at HuffPost, starting with the fact that we have 2 nap rooms. We have regular meditation, yoga, breathing classes. But also, in terms of not just my own leadership team, but everybody in the company, we have an email policy which makes it clear that people are not expected to be on email when they're off work. And the idea is that if there is something urgent that happens, we can text them or call them. But otherwise, people need predictable time off. And if they have to be on, even if nobody reaches out to them, something is different. You feel you have to be checking. You cannot really be completely disconnected. So we found that incredibly helpful. Also, I find that I have regular walking meetings. Instead of having a meeting in my office, I just go for a 20, 30-minute walk with whoever, one of my editors or business leaders, and we just have our meeting while walking. So I have a pair of tennis shoes in my office, and it's just really great. It makes it a completely concentrated conversation. The other thing that we're just introducing is unless you have a specific reason why you need to be on your device, our meetings are device-free. My leadership meetings went from 1 hour to half an hour when I said no devices in the meeting. We've given everybody nice notebooks where they can take notes if they want. Does everybody remember how to write here? So we're also creating a well-being committee with a lot of companies to learn from each other in terms of best practices. So we'd love to talk with you if you want to be in touch about some of the other best practices that we're identifying from different companies. And I love what you have at Google, Search Inside Yourself. I think it's a great program. And actually, I just joined the board of Search Inside Yourself. And I really love all the work being done there.
Thank you so much. One of the things we started doing as a result of reading a lot of what you share also on your blog is no emailing first thing in the morning, and really starting with strategy or just meditation or reflection, as opposed to like getting right into that pulse of the fight the email urge. So thank you.
That is fantastic. That's major because, again, there is so much science that shows that when you start your day responding to emails, you are basically allowing other people to hijack your best time. The time when you can be most creative, you're just becoming reactive and responding to what other people consider their priorities.
Des, thanks for that reminder.
Hi, my name's Courtney, and I'm interning at Google, and this is my first internship. And I was wondering what piece of advice you would give yourself if, when you were starting out, that you wish you had known looking back.
Great. I would tell myself to stop worrying. Because I was a big worrier. I had this voice in my head that I called the obnoxious roommate living in my head that puts me down, that has negative fantasies about the future. And I think what I would have told my young self is be in the moment. And recognize one of my favorite quotes in the book is by Rumi, the poet, who said, live life as though everything is rigged in your favor. You know how often we tend to live life thinking that whatever happens, immediately we'll say it's just kind of life is not fair, feeling kind of sorry for ourselves. And when we look back at our lives, very often some of the hardest things that happened were the things that opened other doors and led to other wonderful things happening. I mean, I have so many stories like that in my own life, and I mention a few of them in the book just to remind all of us that that's the same truth for all of us.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Steven. You talked a lot about sleep and the importance of sleep. My happy place is right before...
Introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm Steven. I work with DoubleClick.
Okay.
And my happy place is right before I fall asleep. So in the past, I've used some apps, sleep cycle apps, you give it a window and it tries to wake you up when you're in lighter sleep. Did you study any of that or have you tried any of that for waking up easier?
You mean to wake up when you need to wake up to start your day?
Right.
Is that what you mean?
Well, and it works for naps too, but longer
Yeah.
it works a little better.
Well, actually, what I recommend is that you get enough sleep so that you don't need an alarm. And that's really, the science shows that you can overeat, but you cannot oversleep. So whatever the time is that your body and your mind needs is the time to give yourself. I mean, you know, it's not going to happen every day. I mean, even with all the evangelizing I'm doing, I only get it done about 90% of the time. And it doesn't matter where you start. You know, maybe you'll get it done 50% of the time. It doesn't matter. There is no wrong place to start. The important thing is that where you want to end up in is to be able to wake up refreshed. And it's not really as hard as you think, because you're so much more productive during your day that you find that it becomes easier and easier to actually give yourself that time. And you also learn what to say no to. In fact, especially for women, I just want to remind you all that no is a complete sentence. And that, again, helps you prioritize what makes us more effective, productive, and happier.
Hi, Arianna. I'm going to bring this down since I'm a little bit shorter than other people commenting. Thank you so much for your comments. I'm Allie Martucci. I work on Bonita's team on the DoubleClick org on the sell side. And I think this is incredibly time appropriate, and it's just so refreshing to hear an executive at your level talking about things like this. The idea that lean in is not diametrically opposed to this concept that you have to lean back in order to lean in. I think it's great. I had a conversation this morning with a colleague, another Googler, who said that he actually spent a weekend away with friends and they all put their phones in boxes for the weekend. And I was like, that's amazing. I'm going to do that and implement that. And I already feel like a few things you mentioned today, not using your phone in your bedroom. I use my phone as my alarm clock, which is clearly not a great thing. But I'm curious about the wisdom piece of what you talk about, and how do you feel like you actively seek out wisdom? Is it a byproduct of other things that you do to seek out well-being and those quiet spaces in your life where you can reflect and be more creative? Or are you actively seeking out people, places, things that will drive, more wisdom into your life in general?
Great. First of all, on the alarm clock, Pottery Barn has some great vintage-looking alarm clocks. They cost $32, but they look great on your nightstand. Right. So anyway, if you wanted another way to make sure you wake up, take a look at that. Or you can put your phone in another room where you can still hear it. In terms of wisdom, yes, I feel that, first of all, if we recognize that we have a place of wisdom in us, every major religion and many scientists have talked about that place. I mean, Archimedes, the Greek mathematician, said, give me a place to stand and I can move the world. And so we all have that place. It's just that most of the time we are completely disconnected from it. So the first thing is that we have our own inner wisdom, and we are all aware of it. When we pay attention, how much wiser we become about people, about what we should be doing next, than when we're just rushing through and reacting to what is happening. But also, I do love reading books of spirituality, philosophy, poetry. In fact, these are the only books I read at night. And I read books at night. You know, I really like books. I like turning them and underlining them, and I like the physicality of it. And also, I like not bringing screens to bed with me. So basically, my bedroom is a device-free zone. And also conversations with people, absolutely. I particularly love talking to scientists because for me, it's just really exciting that we're living at this intersection where modern science is validating ancient wisdom. Like somebody I highly recommend his work is Richard Davidson, a professor of neuroscience at the University of Wisconsin, who has examined the brains of meditating Buddhist monks and literally has put them through MRIs, has put electrodes on their brains, and has seen incredible amounts of delta waves that have to do with creativity, happiness. So again, we have a lot of data that can help validate a certain way of living.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Arianna. I'm Chalmers. I've been at Google for about 2 years. I work on our hiring systems. And my sacred space is family game night. I don't let any electronics intrude on family game night. So what I was wondering was, we talked a lot about all of this in the context of our professional lives. But Bonita shared with us that you're also a mother. And I was wondering what you've done in terms of implementing this in your own life as a parent. And also in terms of educational policy, right? Because much of this is very contra to what we see in childhood education today.
Yes, first of all, my youngest daughter, I have two daughters, 23 and 25. My youngest just graduated in art history. But before they went to college, and whenever we would have a meal when they were in college, we definitely had a policy of no devices during meals. And I think it's really important to institute with your children, as the younger they are, the better. Because we see what's happening now. We go to restaurants and we see children really even being with other children, and they start texting across the table. And that is a lot of consequences in how the brain develops, how empathy develops. So that's really important. What has happened with my own daughters is that they have become real kind of believers now, and we are each other's sort of support buddies when it comes to sleeping, meditating, taking time for renewal, and it's really fascinating to see, you know, how if anybody here has been through AA, you know, you have your sponsors, so we are like each other's sponsors. Like the other day, my daughter was kind of tempted to binge watch House of Cards. So she called me up and I talked her down. It's actually good to find we call them also thrive buddies. It's good to find a thrive buddy that you can, when you decide to make any change. And you know, I recommend starting with small microscopic changes, whatever you choose of the 12 steps. And whenever you begin on a change, partner with somebody, and then you can, it's easy to support each other, to celebrate when you're doing it, and to not judge yourselves, but help each other when you're backtrack.
Thank you.
Hi, Arianna. I'm Holly, and I'm based here in New York for at least another couple of days, working on the agency team, but I'm headed to Mountain View for a new role next week, working on the marketing team. Thanks for being here. You're a major inspiration. And I have a question about vacation. And I worked for a couple of years in the UK where I realized that they have a standard of taking a month off. They'll take the whole month of August off, and it's just kind of par for the course. And that was just so foreign to me, literally and figuratively. And then coming back here to the States, it's a kind of an adjustment. Like, we apologize for taking 2 weeks off, a whole 2 weeks. We feel guilty. We stay connected to our devices. Are we taking enough vacation time here? And this is not kind of a Google sort of like, I'm not angling for anything here at Google at the moment. I don't know if anyone from HR is in the room, but really, are we giving ourselves enough away time? And those little moments that we're taking, obviously so important, walk in Central Park or time with a book. But how about just a change of scene?
Yeah.
Do the Europeans know something we don't know? And do you think that the winds of change are blowing here into the States eventually, or are we getting enough?
Great question. And in fact, I wrote a blog post about it today that is on the Huffington Post. The title is Lincoln, FDR, and the Power of a Good Vacation. Because FDR, when after he was elected for the third time, there was a lot of pressure on him to make a decision on what would the states do regarding the Second World War. There was a lot of pressure from Churchill, from England for the states to intervene. The American public was completely opposed to it. So he had this very big, difficult decision to make, and everybody wanted him to make it right away after the election. Instead, he took 10 days off and went to the Caribbean. And during that time, he came up with what turned out to be a brilliant idea of a land lease policy whereby America would enter the war, but basically it would be a lease in terms of the funding from the UK. Anyway, a complicated idea which the American public bought and allowed America to enter the war. And this would be really difficult now. It would be really difficult for a president to take, 2 days off. I mean, you see immediately it was announced the president is going to Martha's Vineyard, the criticism starts. And there is a very big truth to the need for completely disconnecting and what that does to our health, our mental clarity, our ability to come up with great ideas. And I agree with you. I think it's very important, first of all, that everybody takes their full vacation, because Americans are at the bottom of the list in terms of actually taking the vacation that people are due. I mean, I don't know what you have here. I mean, we give 3 weeks vacation, and we tell people they have to take it. And it's really important when you take your vacation to really disconnect. And I set an example over Christmas when I was away, again, together with 2 friends, Mika Brzezinski and Cindy Lee. We were in different parts vacationing, but we all agreed to do a digital detox for a week, where I checked in with the office just twice a day, and other than that, I was completely off email. So whatever you need to do to have as much complete disconnection as possible, because 56% of people return from vacation more exhausted than before, because they try to be on vacation, be with their families, and stay connected to their office. So absolutely, we need to rethink vacations and how important they are to the way we function in our work as well as in our lives.
Hi, Arianna. My name is Jason V. I work under Bonita's org in the entertainment and music partnerships team. My question to you is about gender. In terms of the tips that you've outlined for thriving, do you think that there are any fundamental differences or tweaks for a man of looking at leaning back to be able to lean in further and become successful? Or are all these concepts that you're talking about from a scientific perspective and your own perspectives completely gender neutral?
Completely gender neutral. Absolutely no difference. I think men and women need these. I mean, every sex needs them as much as the other. How many sexes are there? Only 2. It doesn't matter what sex you are. The problem is that sleep deprivation and burnout have become a kind of macho badge of honor. So sometimes men have a harder time incorporating these new ideas. But if any man has a hard time incorporating, they should look at athletes. They should look at what LeBron James or Richard Sherman from the Seattle Seahawks are doing around sleep, meditation, and all these things, and how they actually consider them performance enhancement tools. And just one other image for the men who have a harder time disconnecting and allowing themselves to have time for renewal is to watch an interview that Charlie Rose did with Andy Murray, you know, the tennis player. And Andy Murray was talking about how when he's fully recharged and rested, the ball is coming at him in slow motion. So he is in a place where he can deal with it and have the clarity of thought to make a decision because it's not coming at him like that. And I think it's a great metaphor because I know when I'm exhausted, everything is coming at me kind of all at once and it's overwhelming and I get reactive and I'm not as able to operate from my best, kind of wisest self.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jenna. I've been with Google for 3 years, based in our Singapore office. And I've been tasked with running around countries where we don't have offices in Southeast Asia to figure out what to do for Google. So I spent most of my time in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. And these are some of the most highly repressive, volatile, corrupt countries in the world. I've recently moved back to join Jared Cohen's team, who you mentioned, the Google Ideas team. So I'm still operating in that space, but I'm experiencing some reverse culture shock, where I'm noticing as I watch the news how frequently we complain about first world problems, quote unquote, and how we can get overly consumed with these issues that only we face, be it in New York or in the United States. And I'm wondering, in your life, as you've grown and developed your wisdom and kept yourself grounded, how do you maintain this perspective?
Well, maintaining perspective is actually one of the best ways to connect to our own wisdom. And looking at what's happening in the rest of the world is a great way to maintain perspective. In the same way we talked about death recently, Socrates said, practice death daily. He didn't mean it in a morbid sense, but he meant it in the sense that when we remember that death is part of life, and when you go to Pakistan or Sri Lanka and you see, death is much more present in everyday life, because of the level of violence, because of the level of poverty. Again, it does put everything in perspective. And I think the amount of worry that we bring to everyday issues that don't deserve worry diminishes when we have that kind of perspective. Let me just say one other thing, which is that everything we discussed today and everything in Thrive applies just as much to people in extreme adversity. Because in fact, the more adverse the circumstance of your life, the more you need to tap into your own resilience to be able to survive and even thrive and transcend your circumstances. That's why in the book I even include examples of people in concentration camps, because there are people who are able to transcend even the most horrific circumstances, and there are others who fall apart when they lose a job. In fact, there's a very interesting study in the book by the University of Chicago that tracked what happened to people, thousands of people who were fired by the Illinois Bell Company, one of the biggest corporate downsizings in history. And they followed them, and 2/3 of them fell apart. They became alcoholics, they became depressed, and 1/3 thrived and went on to bigger jobs, started their own companies. So the same thing is, has a very dramatically different impact on different people, depending on how resilient and connected to their own inner strength and wisdom they are.
Thank you.
think this will be our last question. Oh, we have one more. Okay, so these will be our last two questions. And then we'll leave a little bit of time for you if you'd like to have a book signed.
Thank you. I'll make this quick. My name's Justine. I'm a community manager for Google. I'm actually visiting from Mountain View, so this is perfect timing for me. I'm curious, you just spoke about folks who might be in adverse circumstances or need to be resilient, a lot of people who might not be connected to technology. I noticed a lot of your advice revolves around disconnecting and unplugging, a lot of not using your phone or closing your laptop during meetings. So I'm curious to hear what type of advice you have that doesn't necessarily do with technology, something that might resonate with someone who, again, may not have access to internet or smartphone.
Who may not have access to
internet or smartphone or other forms of technology that sort of speaks to a lot of the advice that you're giving.
Absolutely. So you're right. I mean, the technology is just one aspect of our modern lives that makes it harder to connect with ourselves. But we can have absolutely no technology and still not connect with ourselves. We can find other avoidance measures. And that's why I think leaving aside technology, prioritizing sort of time when we can have stillness and silence in our lives, even if it is 5 or 10 minutes that we want to start with, helps us connect with that part of ourselves that so often we are disconnected from. And if you think of human evolution, we continue to evolve in terms of our consciousness, in terms of our thoughts, in terms of our feelings. And when we allow ourselves to have that space in our lives, it just dramatically affects how we respond to everything that happens to us. And that's the same in every culture. I mean, in Japanese culture, we just launched the Huffington Post in Japan, and the concept of ma, which literally means pause, is just an essential part of the culture. That's why you have the tea ceremony, which is a time where you pause from whatever it is you're doing and just really allow that sacred space in your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And our last question?
Hi, Arianna. Thank you for being here today. You are a big inspiration of mine. So I was very excited to see that Bonita had arranged this talk today. So my name is Sophie. I work in the
authors group.
In the agency team for DoubleClick. I come from France, and in France, the standards are very different. I thought that coming over to the US, I really admired Americans because they seem to be so much more energized than we are. They are on all the time, and I just thought maybe I'm not ambitious enough, or maybe I'm not driven enough, but I just think this is crazy, and so. And so I'm also part of the Google Guys Task Force for our organization within Google. And basically, well-being and the fact that we are plugged in all the time is one of the biggest concerns across the board of our team. And so we want to find ways to basically change that. But I find that although at very high level, like VPs, everybody understands that, I feel like when you drill down, managers and directors, some of them really don't see the point. They think that it's about being lazy. They think it's about, So I was wondering, have you encountered this sort of resistance? Mm-hmm. And how did you overcome it?
Great final question. First of all, let me just say that the way we're living and working is crazy. So there's no question about that. It's like, I think that as we are now in a period of transition, which I think is going to be as big when we look back as moving from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance. When, in the Middle Ages, remember, people actually did believe that the whole world revolved around the earth. And they really believed that. Now, if somebody is a flat earther, we don't think very highly of them, right? So I think there will come a day, I hope soon, when actually the collective delusion that burnout is the only way to succeed will be seen as completely barbaric and completely also unscientific. But right now, we see everything. We see the resistance that you are talking about, and we see early adopters changing the way they are living, not just for themselves, but for their teams or their companies. So we are living in this period of transition where the reason for my really wanting to be here, wanting to be speaking and writing about these things, that I believe we can accelerate the transition by sharing our stories and by making people realize that it's not laziness. On the contrary, the people who are going to be the most creative, the people who are going to bring about the most fundamental changes are people who learn to disconnect, reconnect with themselves, their wisdom and strength. And so we need new role models. That's why, for example, I always talk about people who are successful running big teams but doing it differently. And let me just mention one of them, Padma Sri Warrior. She's the Chief Technology Officer of Cisco. She oversees tens of thousands of engineers. We had her speak at our Thrive conference, and she said, I speak for 8 hours. I meditate every day. I paint. I do haikus. And every Saturday, I do a digital detox. And it was amazing. I mean, she's an engineer. She's not lazy. She's super successful. And she's doing it a different way. So I think, especially for all the young people here, and those still in college, we need to publicize these role models. I've been talking about her so much on my book tour that she emailed me and said, Random House wants her to do a book. I said, great, that's really what we need. We need more and more people to hear that there are new ways to accomplish, to achieve, to excel without burnout and without sacrificing your health, your relationships, and your life. Thank you so much.
Thank you.